Hey guys, YouTube Drone Doctor here, and I wanted to take my time before rushing out a video on the Phantom4. There's a lot of videos that are out there already. First of all, the case that this thing comes shipped in is really nice. I mean, granted, this is not something you're going to keep long term and use it to transport, but while you're waiting to buy yourself another case, this is a great alternative just to get you by. I mean, it does protect this thing really well. And speaking of cases, I'm going to do a special video just on the aftermarket cases for this P4, because I'll tell you, the cases that I purchased already to kind of take a look at the build, they're absolute crap. So before you guys go out and purchase a case, just hold off if you can, because I'm going to be having a video up here shortly and show you some of the flaws and what works and what doesn't. So just if you can hold out, just hold out a little bit longer, and I'll put some links up as soon as I get them made at the bottom of this thing to talk about some of the good quality cases for the Phantom4. But there's a lot of stuff to cover, and I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of flight videos, because there's everybody's mother's brother's uncle's monkey that's done a video already on the characteristics of this thing and how it flies and stuff. I'm just going to talk to you basically about whether or not this is worth its weight in gold, and if you haven't picked up a Phantom3 yet, do I think that you should take the hit and upgrade to the Phantom4. So without stretching this out any longer, let's get right into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about, when you pull this thing out and you get ready to fly, those of you that have already had the other Phantoms in the past, and no, I do not work for DJI, so let's get that out of the way right away. The first thing that you're going to notice is you're going to have to do your firmware updates on this thing to get yourself ready to go. It's not going to be something like where you pull it out of the box and you can just launch it. You're going to have to do the firmware updates, which is expected. And before you get all alarmed on this thing like I was getting ready for, the way that they've set this up now to do the firmware updates, let me move this out of the way. It's much easier. And what they've done is they made it so that you can take the included cables and directly link it from your iPad or your iPhone, as long as you have Wi-Fi, download the app, of course, and then you just plug it straight into the bird, and you can download your firmware straight into that and straight into the transmitter. There's no more of this transferring it to the SD card and then having to put it into the bird and waiting for it and so forth. You don't have to do that anymore. It's all through the app. So that part, my hat's off to them. I think that was a great idea. They made it a lot easier to do the firmware updates on the Phantom4. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about real briefly is the gimbal lock. Now, the gimbal lock on the old Phantom, or the older version of the Phantom3, it had this, which locked, this little plastic piece which locked in the camera, which was a little confusing for those of you that weren't experienced on taking this on and off. It takes a little bit of time to figure out how this goes back on once it falls out, because if you saw my videos earlier, when I first got this thing, I pulled it out of the box and this was actually off. It wasn't even still mounted. So it was just kind of flopping around in the box, and I had to take a few moments to figure out how to put that gimbal lock back on there. But the gimbal lock that it now comes with on the Phantom4 locks to the bottom of the landing gear. Now, the landing gear locks work really well, but the one thing that I did notice when you're going to put this back into this case, or even some of the other aftermarket cases, is that this gimbal lock, if you look down here at the bottom, you can slide this to different points. I mean, when you pop it on, it'll line up in different locations, and then you're constantly moving this back. So I just put a little dot on here so that I can line it up a little bit easier when I snap these on and off, because to get this gimbal lock on and off, it's pretty easy. It just pops off, and then you just pop it back on. It does a great job securing it, but when you're putting this back together and you want to transport, you want to have everything lined up perfectly. So, you know, obviously I'm going to be getting all kinds of different emails that I'm probably doing that wrong, but that's the way that I found that you line it up, and it lines up pretty good if you just put a couple little reference points. I put a couple little dots on here, and now you can drop it into the case. And what I mean by that is, for example, you see these little cutouts that are in there. So when you drop this in here, you can see that they have to line up or they're not going to fit. And some of the aftermarket cases, they didn't do a very good job of lining up those gimbal locks. And like I said, I'm going to go into some of those reviews on those cases at a later date. So I'll keep you posted on that. Now the next thing I want to talk to you briefly about is the Go app, or the different modes that this has. It's the same Go app, but when you connect the P4 to it, you're going to get a different screen. The one thing that was really nice that I liked was the fact that they actually have, well, I'll let this thing warm up, but it actually has that little radar symbol that you saw here at the bottom, which tells you how many feet you are, there it is, from the ground. As you lift off or come in for a landing, it actually tells you your distance as you're coming down. You're going to be landing line of sight anyway, but everything else is very, very similar. It'll tell you here also the ground, how many feet away you are as you're coming in for a landing. Is it helpful? Yes, all this little tidbits that they include on this thing are definitely helpful. But let's go into some of the different modes you guys have seen. If you haven't, take a look on YouTube. There's all kinds of people explaining how to do different things and different ways of flying into the different modes. But I'm just going to go into this real briefly. When you hit the different modes here, you can hit the tap fly. Those of you who don't know what tap fly is, you can take a look on YouTube, and there's a bunch of people showing demos on it. This is the key, is knowing where you are on this horizontal. You can see this little line here. So you have that line, and as you move your camera up and down, you can see this is where you want to go. So you have to be above that line or in an area. If you go down to an area, let's say you're at 400 feet, and you set your parameters to be maximum of 400, you go to hit up here, which is above that horizontal line, and you want to go above that, it's going to tell you that you're flying into an area that you can't go or you should not be going. So that part is kind of a good thing. Now the other thing is you can have active track. Those of you who don't know what that is, when you put, you can go through the tutorial. There's lots of stuff on how to do this. You basically draw a little box around the thing that you want to track, whether it's a animal or yourself or whatever, and you can actually have this thing do a following type of a thing that'll constantly take you around the park or whatever the case might be. Now let me put this thing back into, back into normal. Well, the other thing also is the intelligence. Those of you who are familiar with the Phantom3, you have the points of interest, the follow me, the waypoints, the home lock, course lock. I'm not going to go into that because, like I said, there's so many different videos out there that explain all this. I really want to get in the nuts and bolts of what my impressions are on this and what I feel are the pluses and whether or not this is actually worth the extra money that people are going to have to spend to go to the Phantom 4 version of this. Now, one of the things that, well, matter of fact, let me shut this off and we'll talk about some other stuff. Now, some of the other things that you're going to notice about this versus the Phantom 3, and I know you guys have seen all the different people that have done this and they've showed you the different sizes and etc and so on. This thing is pretty much identical in size. Yes, it's a little bit chubbier on the design. It is a sleeker design. The gimbal is totally different. Obviously, this gimbal stays a lot more exposed, and you can see the different little things that they put in here to keep the gimbal shake down to a minimum. And what they've done here is try to include all of it and keep it more aerodynamic. Now, people have asked me whether or not the aerodynamic smoothness of this really makes a difference. It does, especially when you start thinking about this thing maintaining a hover. We've had this thing up in some conditions where it's probably not good to fly. We've been up in 25-mile-an-hour winds. Today is really, really windy conditions, and I took this thing up there and I actually was flying both of these. This holds its position a lot easier, probably because of the motors being a little bit more powerful, but the other thing, in my opinion, is because of its shape. It's not catching the wind as much as that camera is. It being tucked away like that, I think its aerodynamics are a lot better when you're in high winds or you're flying at high speed. Oh, speaking of speed, let's talk about the speed mode. You guys have talked about or seen the speed mode. People talked about it. When you put this on S, on this little selector, so you have the regular GPS setting, the attitude mode, and then S for speed. Speed is kind of like an agility mode. Those of you that are familiar with maybe the Blades series when they had this Stagility and so forth, the speed mode on the Phantom 4 is like a rocket ship. Now, that being said, I'm telling you, if you are brand new to flying, don't go out and put this thing into speed mode and think that you're going to be okay. It is very, very responsive. You don't have your GPS, you don't have your collision avoidance, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the collision avoidance stuff. But as far as using the speed mode when you're a new pilot, dumb. It's just really, really dumb. Now, there's a lot of different things about this that are definitely worth it. Now, a lot of people are asking me, oh, but this collision avoidance thing must be really the cat's meow. Yes and no. You have to remember, it's always better, if you can afford it, it's always better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So what I mean by that is when you're using a return to home type of feature where maybe you've lost signal for whatever the case might be, you get into some heavily wooded areas doing the tracking mode or something, and it loses signal somehow and it needs to come home. The most important thing that you want to do is make sure that you set your parameters for its maximum height to go up. For me, I put this thing up to 400, so I know that it's going to clear anything before it starts to come back home. The last thing you want to do is only go up 60 feet and start coming back home, and now you've flown into a tree or something. Now, I know what you're going to all be saying, that, well, what about the collision avoidance? Well, you have to remember the collision avoidance is a tool like anything else. It will help you to avoid an obstacle, but it is not foolproof. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you're coming home and you have a tree with a limb that's hanging over doing this kind of a thing. It will recognize that it's coming to a tree and it will start to go around that obstacle, whether it's around this way or going straight up. If it goes straight up and it doesn't have any sensors up here, it's not going to know that there's a limb straight over this thing, and it's going to go right into that tree limb. So, in my opinion, it's better to clear it in the first place. Granted, those of you that are relying on your obstacle avoidance and you say, well, you know what, I can push this go-to point where you can just have this thing fly to a certain point, that's great, but it's kind of like the auto park feature on a vehicle. I personally, I have vehicles that park themselves and so forth. Do I use it? No. The reason is I don't like relying on the computer to do everything in all of my driving, even being the parking type of situation. I like to be able to park myself. My kids, now that's the different thing. Now, they would probably like to use that every single time, but when they're with me, I make them park the vehicle. I just think that it's better to have that skill. Same thing with these. I mean, it's nice to have it, but don't rely on it. Learn how to do the basics, learn how to fly, and use the common sense parameters when you're coming home or you're setting your return to home height. Make sure you can clear everything and come home. Don't set it so low that you're coming back home at 60 feet and you've got to worry about that tree that's 80 feet high and you're relying on the collision avoidance to clear that. Set it so that you don't have to worry about that in the first place, and don't fly near things that you have to worry about the collision avoidance kicking into keeping you from crashing. Common sense, really what it comes down to. Now here's something that I probably wasn't going to talk about, but it's kind of an interesting thing that I found. Been playing with several of these and several of my friends that have them. When we change lens filters, this little bezel that screws on and off, on the Phantom 4, very easy to take off. On the Phantom 3s, total freaking nightmare. It's almost scary when it seemed like these things were almost on there with Loctite, and for us to get that bezel off of there for the initial crack off so we could screw on the filters, the ND filters, good grief. I mean, it was scary to pop those off. So for that, DJI, thank you for making it much, much easier to take these filters off and make them interchangeable. So good job there. So the next thing I want to talk about that I get this question all the time is what kind of flight time was I getting on this Phantom 4? They're claiming 25 minutes. Are you really getting 25 minutes? And the answer is, yeah, pretty damn close. Obviously, it always comes down to, you see how I have to line that up. Obviously, it always comes down to what kind of terrain you're flying in. Are the wind conditions really, really bad? But when you look at the way, let's talk about this battery first of all. The way that they made this battery, I love the fact that they put these cooling fins in between the battery cells. So those of you that are wondering whether or not that actually helps in cooling, oh yes it does. It definitely helps in cooling. This is a big battery. It charges fairly quickly. It's not bad. Getting them right now is kind of a pain. I know that there's a few places that have them in stock. Carolina Drones, Frank over there has some in stock, but I'll tell you, it's very, very difficult to find these batteries right now at the time of this video. But I'll tell you, flight times, absolutely, not a problem. We were getting consistently 22 minutes, and that's doing a lot of speed and different types of aggressive flying with this thing, and flying in some really high winds. It's really, really good when it comes to, and I'm bringing it back at about 20% or less. There's sometimes when I'm landing this thing with 10% battery life in it, but yeah, you'll definitely get over 20 minutes of regular flying time out of that battery. So I think also that has contributed to the aerodynamic design that they have in this now and the low wind resistance that you're getting. So for that part, I think it's definitely great. So next thing we're going to talk about, let's talk about range. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was range, and you'll notice there's a different change of scenery here, and the reason is I went back and looked at my video, and I apologize that that section of video that I talked about the range was deleted for some reason. I guess I didn't like it for something, I don't know. But anyway, real short and sweet, the range on the Phantom 4 compared to the Phantom 3 is almost identical. The both of them, I took these things out, I flew them in the same type of situations. Those of you that have been following my channel, I will put a link down here at the bottom. A long time ago, I did a long-range flight test with the Phantom 3 and also the Inspire 1 version 1, and was able to fly out 15,000 feet with both of those craft. And I can tell you that after taking this Phantom 4 all over the place in different parts of the world and flying this thing, and I can tell you that the flight characteristics of the Phantom 4 are almost identical to the Phantom 3 as far as range and video transmission and so forth. Everything is pretty much the same. So the only thing that they have really done with this Phantom 4 as far as range and so forth, it just seems like they've added a few more things to the Go app, and all of those things that they've added I think are great features, especially for newer pilots. I think that the new features that they added will certainly help them. But if you're asking, is the Phantom 4 going to have the new Lightbridge 2 system, and does it have more range and that kind of thing? The answer is no. It's pretty much exactly the same as the Phantom 3 as far as range and video transmission. There's a couple locations that I thought that maybe the Phantom 3 had a few better connection points, but I don't know if that could be attributed to the environment that I was in for that moment. You know, the stars didn't align correctly, who knows? It's just kind of hit and miss anytime you're dealing with video transmissions with any kind of craft, obviously, whether it's Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth or Lightbridge or anything. So those of you that are wondering, that is pretty much it. And like I said, I will put a link down here at the bottom for those of you who have not seen that video where we flight test the Phantom 3 and the Inspire 1 version 1, and we get out, 3 miles, 15,000 feet with both of those crafts. I'll show you that, and I'll put that down on a link below. So let's move on to the next section that we want to talk about. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention real quick was the charging on this. It charges fairly quickly, but those of you that are asking me if I've had any issues with the battery, I can tell you that this charges up to 98%. The connection on the battery is very, very easy to connect. It's a very positive connection on it, but I usually get 98% when I charge this thing. Does it mean there's something defective on it? I don't know, but I can tell you that I'm getting normal flight times out of it, at least it seems to be. I'll monitor the situation. I don't know whether or not it's slowly building the battery up during the break-in period. We'll just wait and see. But 98%, I'm still getting pretty much the same flight time. There's probably been a couple times where it's taken it all the way up to 100%, but it seems that when I charge this thing completely where it shuts off on the battery charger and then I plug it into the bird and I check it out, it says 98%. It doesn't matter whether or not I leave it on there and let it trickle out for another couple hours, it's still 98% when I plug it into the bird. So we'll see. I don't know. Maybe it might be just a break-in period, but we'll check it out. Now, the other thing that we're going to talk real quickly about is the blades. Everybody's been showing you how easily these things press on, and it's kind of like a child lock. You push down on it and it firmly locks on and into place. I love that design, but I hate that design. And what I mean by that is those of you that have watched the way that the Inspires lock on. The Inspire, the new version, when you put this thing on, it has two clips that actually rotate and lock the blade or the rotors on in place. I really like that much better. But you know, you can, I don't know if you guys can pick this up, but there's a little bit of flop or a little bit of play in each one of these after you put these on. I don't like that. And I'm assuming that they want to make this a consumable, they being DJI, want to make this a consumable part, so people are having to replace this. But for me, and this is just an opinion, I just see potential for failure. So I would love to see a better mounting system than this. I get it. It mounts on there quickly. It's, you know, a good, quick way of attaching these rotors and putting them into smaller cases. And we're talking about a hobby type drone. This is not the you know, the Inspire type pro design where you're attaching you know, a $3,000 camera underneath it, or $2,100 plus lens. I mean, you're still talking about $2,500 camera to the bottom of it, or even worse yet, you're attaching a thermal FLIR system to the bottom of it, where now you're dealing with a $6,000 to $10,000 camera. You definitely want to have a doggone good design rotor system for that. But I just think that this is a setup for failure. I could be totally wrong. You know, the other ones that we use for the Inspire seem to work, but I try to minimize how many times I have to take these on and off, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to go into the case designs a little bit later. I like using this temporarily, but the cases that I purchased for the Phantom 4 so far have been very disappointing, and I'm hoping that some of these companies take some of this free advice that I'm going to give on some of the reviews on these cases, because they really need to make some improvements. So those of you, again, if you're looking to buy a case for this Phantom 4, hold off. I've got some better alternatives coming. So anyway, that's my real quick synopsis of the Phantom 4. Do I think that it's worth the upgrade from the Phantom 3? It really comes down to your budget and your skill set. If you're very first time going out here and you're looking at buying the DJI Phantom series, and you can afford getting the upgrade and going to the Phantom 4, like I said, it's always better to have it. We're talking about the collision avoidance. It's always better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So anything that you can do to minimize the possibility of having a crash or running into something, you know, and you can afford it, then yeah, it is quite an upgrade. I love the fact that this thing is so simple now to do firmware updates. But those of you who've been tracking all my videos, things change. Things can change from week to week, month to month, day to day. This technology is moving very quickly, and the way that some of these companies are taking care of their customers seems to change. So what one company is doing great today could be absolutely horrible tomorrow, and it really comes down to who is running the show of what I'm discovering. So thanks again for watching, guys. If you're looking to pick one of these up, talk to Frank over at carolinadrones.com. That's DRONZ.com, and I'll put a link down here at the bottom. And tell him the YouTube Drone Doctor sent you, and Frank will hook you up and maybe even set you up with some special pricing. So again, I appreciate all your support. Send me your comments and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, and I'll talk to you all on the next video.